Chapter 7, Section 1, Chemical Names and Formulas. We finish how to write name and formulas for ionic compound. Now how to write name and formulas for covalent compound. So first you have to memorize that covalent compound, it's a compound between nonmetal and nonmetal. So what are the rules? Rule number 1, use prefix to indicate the number of each element. Prefix means a word used before the name of element. So for example, to indicate number 1, you have to use the prefix mono. So for 1, you have to use mono. For 2, di. For 3, tri. For tetra. 5, penta. 6, hexa. 7, hepta. 8, octa. 9, nona, and 10, deca. So you have to use this prefix to indicate the number of each element. Rule number 2, the name, the root of the name of the second element must end with IDE. Rule number 3, don't use the prefix mono for the first element. So now on examples. Example number 1. What is the name for N2O5? Nitrogen is a nonmetal, oxygen nonmetal, so it's a covalent compound. So you have to follow the rules. Rule number 1, use a prefix to indicate the number of each element. Here you have nitrogen. How many nitrogen atoms? You have 2. So which prefix indicate 2? Di. So you have to start the name with the prefix. So before you write nitrogen, you have to use the prefix di-nitrogen. Now, what about oxygen? How many oxygen atoms? 5. So which prefix indicate 5? Penta. So you have to start the name with penta. Now the second element, rule number 2, the root of the name of the second element must end with IDE. So instead of oxygen, oxide. So here the name di-nitrogen pentoxide. Another example. P4O10. Now here phosphorus, you have 4 atoms of phosphorus. So which prefix indicate 4? Tetra. So you have to start the name with tetra. So tetra, phosphorus. Now oxygen, how many oxygen atoms? 10. So the prefix that indicate 10, deca. And the second element, as rule number 2, must end with IDE. So decoxide. Now what about CO? Carbon, how many carbon atoms? 1. So which prefix indicate 1? Mono. But according to rule number 3, don't use mono for the first element. So if you write monocarbon, monoxide, false. Don't use mono. So the name is carbon monoxide. Now what about CO2? The first element carbon, it has one atom, so don't use mono for the first element, so direct carbon. Now the second element, you have 2, so prefix that indicate 2 di, and the second element must end with IDE, so dioxide. SF6. S for sulfur, it has one atom, so don't use mono for the first element, so direct sulfur. Here, fluorine, you have 6, so prefix that indicates 6, hexa. And the second element must end with IDE, so hexafluoride. The last example, Cl4, C for carbon, one atom, don't use mono for the first element, so direct carbon. And here the chlorine, you have 4, so prefix that indicate 4, tetra, and the second element must end with IDE, so tetra chloride. So now we finish how to write name for covalent compound. Again, the rules are you have to use a prefix to indicate the number of each element. So for 1 mono, 2 di, 3 tri, and so on. So the second element, the name of the second element must end with IDE, and rule number 3, don't use mono for the first element. Now, what about the reverse? If you have the name of covalent compound and how to convert to formula. So just the prefix, you have to get which number for each prefix. So here carbon, tetrafluoride. So how many fluoride? Tetra for number 4. So you have 4 fluoride atom. Now what about dinitrogen? So nitrogen, and how many nitrogen? Di refers to the number 2, so 2. Now trioxide, oxide for oxygen. How many oxygen? Tri refers to number 3. Now phosphorus trichloride, phosphorus for P, trichloride, chloride Cl. How many chloride? Tri, so tri for number 3. Now what about nitrogen monoxide? Nitrogen monoxide, oxide for oxygen. How many oxygen? Mono. Mono refers to 1, so NO. The last example, oxygen difluoride. Oxygen difluoride, you have fluoride. How many di? Di refers to 2, so OF2.